Hello. My name is John Martell. I'm a first-year MBA student at Sloan. I'm thrilled to introduce our next guest, Kirk Goldsberry of the San Antonio Spurs, where he works in their strategic research division. He's giving a talk on the Curry effect. And with that, I'll give it over to Kurt.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I accepted this invitation, as I always do, but before I took this job. So this will be the worst talk you attend. I have nothing to say. I'm not allowed to say. I am allowed to talk about things I used to write because they're out in public record. So that's what I'll, if I get anything substantial, to be old. So thanks for coming. I was going to talk about John Wesley Powell, but we're going to skip that because we only have 28 minutes left. For those who don't know me, I make maps, and I applied that to basketball data about 4 years ago at this very conference. So this conference is very special to me. It's where I sort of introduced how I was thinking about basketball analysis and using things from other realms, not just regression or not just typical stats, but cartography in this case. But I want to start with some trivia, you guys, because remember, I can't say anything. So I also got to do this cool project with the NBA. They commissioned me to do this mural. They sent me 13 years of shooting data, which is about 2.7 million field goal attempts. And Jason Rosenfeld, who's a good friend of mine and a great leader at the NBA in their analytics department, and I came up with this idea to figure out which players in that 13-year span were the best shooters in these different spots. So let's start with this, the most important spot on the basketball court. Now, we looked at, there's a minimum threshold going on here. So this is minimum 5,000 attempts, about 40 people qualified, and we're looking for the person who has the highest field goal percentage between 2002 and 2015 in that zone. Tom? Oh, who do you have? Shaq is a good guess. It's not. Tim Duncan, no. Tony Parker, no. LeBron James, come on. And one of my favorite stats from the 2013 season when they won, I forget who they beat, but they won the finals. He led the league in attempts and field goal percentage in that area. That's incredible. And what I said back then was like, anybody who does that is automatically the best player in basketball. Like if you're able to do that, and that was something that Shaq was the previous person to do that. So you were on the right track. But if you could own that spot in terms of volume and efficiency, basketball is a pretty simple game. That means you're the best player in the league. Let's get into some jump shots. Who do you guys think here? Ray Allen? No. Dirk. There we go. All right, let's keep moving. No. Oh, that's a good point. Dirk did own a couple spots, but we only let you have one spot. But this guy also owned a couple spots. Yeah, he's going to be on the next one. You're on the right track. There we go. Chris Paul. This one is one of the more obscure guys we'll see up here. Yeah. No, he's a great shooter, though. Champion player, has an iconic sort of dance after he makes a shot in a playoff game. Not that iconic. Not that iconic. Not that iconic. The Jet. All right, we'll zoom through these. Tom Haberstroh knows this one by the back of his hand. Left corner three. No. Ray Allen. Steph will get there. Well, he isn't at our threshold for there yet. This one's obscure. This is another one that we gave to somebody who was second or third because Korver and Nash and Dirk appeared already in the chart. Wesley. This is my favorite. New Hampshire zone. We were able to auction off one of these posters at Matt's charity event in Toronto a couple weeks ago. That was great. Here's the Illuminati. And then last but not least. So This was a really cool project. I think it shows how analytics is really helping us more richly characterize these guys we love to watch play basketball. And it's not just about Moneyball. And Michael Lewis, we owe the world to him for that book, but he also sort of framed analytics as this thing that one team uses to beat another team, or one manager uses it to come up with an optimal batting order or pitching rotation. And that's definitely true. That's my current job too. But analytics has a place, as my friend Tom here uses in the media and storytelling, but in terms of understanding the league in all different capacities. And that's one of the things I want to think about here today. So yeah, that's up on a wall. If you're at the MBA office, you can check it out. We're pretty happy about that. So I'm going to use the rest of my 23 minutes to talk about the three-point line. And I'm going to say some things. And remember, I'm not advocating certain things here, you guys. So Goldsberry wants to move the three-point line. No, that's not what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this, that we can use analytics in a new sort of regulatory capacity to monitor the game and make decisions like where the three-point line should be in an informed manner in 2016. Whereas the last time we were moving the line and considering these changes, we didn't have access to that kind of intelligence. That's the point. So analytics as a regulatory device is a new sort of window I think we see for league offices. So when we think of the legendary shooters like we just saw on that mural, we often think of the game's best three-point shooters, but as crazy as it sounds, the league didn't even have the three-point line when I was born. It didn't even exist. It was a very different league. Who knows what year we added the three-point line? 79. We added Magic, which was also a great addition to the league's landscape and very important. But we added the three-point line too. I'll let you guys decide which is more significant. But they're both obviously mammoth additions to the league. But that first year, you know, the line was essentially a marketing concept borrowed from the ABA, whose commissioner at that time was George Mikan. And he suggested this new line would give smaller players, quote, a chance to score and open up the defense to make the game more enjoyable for the fans. Pretty prophetic, right? Great idea, George. And it worked. We took it. But a couple things have changed. The whole game has changed. So in the 20 years leading up to 1979, when we implemented the ARC, NBA centers won the MVP award 19 times. And in the last 20 years, NBA centers have won the MVP award 2 times. So that tells you how the whole economic landscape has changed in the three-point era. The center is literally less valuable than he used to be. The guard is more valuable. But the saga of three-point shooting, it's really interesting from an instructive standpoint to think it's a very gradual increase. You would think if a league added a 4-point shot or a 7-point shot or whatever, people would be shooting it all the time. But in that first year, 1979-80, only 3% of field goals, essentially 2 a game, were threes. Teams averaged 2.4 points per game from three-point shooting. This year, this graph stops in 2013-14. But this year, that number is 28%. And we're scoring over 25 points a game in three-point shots. So in terms of points per game, the three-pointer itself has gone from like this role player to the marquee star scorer. 25 points per game is a pretty good number. Additionally, Magic Johnson, who, as we pointed out, played his entire career in the three-point era as one of the best point guards the world's ever seen, ended his career in 1996 with 325 made three-pointers. And as of yesterday, Stephen Curry, probably the defining player of our current season, has 304 made three-pointers this year. So that tells you just point guards are a little different these days than when Magic was playing the game. One other notable thing when we're talking about the history of the three-point line is the league has moved the three-point line in the past. And a lot of you are too young to remember this, but you know, we all remember this moment from the 1997 finals, but few of us remember that series was actually played with a shortened three-point arc at the end of a 3-year experiment where we had a 22-foot arc. So the arc itself right now above the break is 23.75 feet. But at this time, it was 22 feet, uniform. And Jordan won his 6th title the next year with the standard arc that we think of today. So when you're talking about moving the line, we actually have a really nice precedent. We have that 3-year window where we moved it in the league. You see that big spike in the middle of the line graph. And then we have those 3 seasons, we move it back out. And what happens when we move it back out? So the last year of that experiment, NBA players took 22% of their shots from three-point range, and they converted 36%. So in this conversation, we're obviously talking about frequency and efficiency. Those are the 2 main variables that the regulators in charge of the playing surface should be considering. And 22% frequency and 36% efficiency. So we move it back to the current line, and it went down to, what do you think, 16%. Efficiency only down to 35%. All right, so moving the line a foot, 0.75, 1 3/4 feet, and not moving it in the corners, mind you, produced an effect where we saw less volume, but not much change in efficiency. And that's a really interesting effect. And their players, obviously, were really interested and concerned about this. And some of the best three-point shooters at the time had some really interesting quotes you can dig up. But I remember Dennis Scott from both college and his days with the Magic. But he had the best quotes I could find. So, this guy's bread and butter is shooting three-point shots, right? And the league's saying, hey, we're moving that line back. And you would think, your first instinct is he'd be angry about that, right? Oh, no, don't mess with that. But instead, he says, I think it's great. Now my records are safe. Well, until I break them again, he says. No more cheap ones, he added. For guys like me, Reggie Miller, Glenn Rice, the distance really doesn't matter. We can shoot from anywhere. So he's saying there's a subset of jump shooting Illuminati out there. They can shoot from 30 feet or whatever. But he said, this is my favorite part, now we'll find out who the real three-point shooters are. A lot of guys won't have that green light to shoot them anymore. All right, fast forward. I like Kevin Love. He gave me a great interview, and I want to give a quote from Kevin, one of my last Grantland articles. I asked him why he is really just fallen in love with the perimeter game, not just in Cleveland, but in Minnesota. And I asked him about it, what's that evolution like? And he's like, well, I grew up in an era when it was just starting, bigs shooting long shots. And it's been a progression. Bigs were starting to shoot 18 feet out, then 20 feet out, then 22 feet out. Guys like Dirk and Peja, 6'10", 7 feet, stepping out, taking that shot. Guys like KG and Chris Webber were stepping out, hitting big shots. The big fundamental was hitting glass from 18 feet. I think the European game had such an influence on this expansion. And he said, my dad was like, you need to watch these guys and do what they do because they can shoot the ball really well. So he says, I think the trend will continue in that direction. We hardly ever see 2 true bigs out there as block players anymore. And if you just look at where Kevin shot his rookie year, and then you look at where he's shooting recently, again, this is 2014-15, you see essentially his game is suburbanized, right? He's taken and he's moving out to the suburbs. And that's interesting because Kevin Love is literally one of the most talented young rebounders we have. But on offense, he's shooting 6.2 threes per game, or he was when I looked this up a week ago or so. And you see the trajectory over time with not only Kevin, he's probably the most dramatic example, but other people who play basketball in a similar way. Guys have been falling in love with longer shots, three-point shots in particular. But 6.2 threes a game, that's the number that really stuck with me. And one of the other crazy stats I found is that in Reggie Miller's 18-year career, he averaged 6.2 three-point attempts per game. one time, and that was the year the arc was moved in, or one of those 3 years. Dennis Scott never did it. So we have Kevin Love shooting threes that much. And so, it's honestly the most cliche Sloan topic there is, the death of the mid-range. But I wanted to dive in. I made this quick graphic showing like what areas of the court are actually more or less popular in that window since I started that mural, when we started that study window with Shaq still playing and Dirk's entire career is in there and stuff. But what you see, unsurprisingly, is like corner threes are much more popular than they were in that time, above the break three, but it's really the baseline game that's become less popular. And it's really an economic story about two landscapes. And I want to mention at this point, my friend Daniel Wittes and I had this idea to build these 3D models of statistical surfaces in the NBA. We're going to be showing them after the talk in a table out there, so come check these things out. We're really proud of them. I think they're really fun. But we sort of conceptualize this as two landscapes. The first one is just how well do people shoot the basketball? What is the probability of a person making a basket from a distance? And then the second landscape is then what is the points structure, the reward system the league has sort of created. And it's really the interaction of those that lies at the heart of this discussion. And so Daniel made these great transects. This is a transect on top that cuts through the baseline of the court. So you can see the cursor here. This is the basket, obviously. And this line cuts essentially straight corner to corner. And as you can see, the field goal percentages don't really drastically shift once you get 10 feet from the basket. Essentially a 37% league, whether you're talking about a 9-foot shot or a corner three. 38, 39, et cetera. But when you say, okay, how many points are people getting for these shots, right? What we're doing is subsidizing that corner shot. And now it becomes an incredible economic option. It becomes the only perimeter shot worth taking. And so it's interesting. And, again, this is based on ideas that you guys have seen me write about for years. That's really the economic picture of contemporary basketball. You can look at it, whether you want to look at it as a plan like this or a line graph like this that shows shot distance and points per shot for a whole season. You see the effect of the subsidy that is the three-point line. And then just as a weird idea, remember, I'm coming at this from like, how would the NBA use analytics, not to figure out who's the best player or best team, but to optimize the playing surface, or maybe consider using analytics to place the three-point line. There's a bunch of weird ideas you can do, but for any of us nerds that have studied field goal percentage and effective field goal percentage for our lives, we know the magic of the 33% number, right? 33% from three, it's as good as 50% from two. We've all done that math. The weirdest idea I have is what if they just put the three-point line at the 33% line for the league? So it's actually a contour line. And every year they study the league and they put the line exactly there. Say, hey, a third of us can make this shot, or we make this shot a third of the time as a population. That means the worst shooters won't be above that mark. It's a crazy idea. I'm not advocating that. Goldsberry says that. No, don't do that. But it's just an idea. Again, it's because we have this incredible data, and the league deserves credit for maintaining the shot coordinates for 15 years, adopting player tracking more recently. So we have this vast amount of information to help us. But the idea that power forwards are now shooting a ton of threes, more than Reggie Miller taught, maybe people should think about how, if we move the line, that would affect this. Is there a way we can legislate that effect out? And again, that's not for me to decide, but it is interesting that Kevin Love's shot chart has really just turned into Chandler Parsons' shot chart. So I think there's really three potential options the league could consider going through this in the next few years. Because the thing about that graph I showed earlier, the line graph, is it's not changing. We're not stopping at 28%. It's going to be 29%. It's going to be 30. College hoops is at 33% right now. The 2012 U.S. Olympic team shot 43s per game in London. That's a 40-minute game for those keeping score at home. Maybe we want this. I'm not saying we don't, but it is definitely happening, and I think we could just use analytics to monitor. And just to reiterate, I think, the one thing that's already starting to come up and percolate this season is moving it back. It's an idea that a lot of us have thought about. This article I wrote after the 2014 NBA Finals. The Heat lost that one. I forget who they lost to, but I looked statistically at huge amounts of shot data and imagined different scenarios. And 25 feet is, to be, the most logical distance to move it to. It's half the width of the court. And back then I looked, and players don't shoot too bad down there, but it does reduce the share of shots. But what's the problem with the 25-foot line? The court is 50 feet wide, so if you have a 25-foot line, obviously you can't shoot in the corner for 3 points. The other thing you can do, say, okay, we're going to widen the court, and I know the building operations guys would love that. So that's probably not going to happen. But some stats from the more current season. So looking at shooting 25 to 30 feet, like this doesn't affect those Dennis Scott. The same thing Dennis Scott was saying back in '97 is true today. And we have numbers to back it up now. Guys like Redick and Curry and Danny Green and J.R. Smith still shoot over 40% from 25 to 30 feet. Jared Solinger, 27%. Kevin Love, 31%. So maybe that's how we get that, if we wanted to do that. But then the crazy idea, and I did preview this both on Grantland and on podcast, is look at if different teams could draw the arc wherever they wanted, within reason. And this is, I do love this idea, but it's crazy. People have honestly told me this is the stupidest thing I've ever said. But I think it would be interesting to consider what would the NBA look like if there was a 36-foot line in Indiana or a 22-foot line in some other place. So the home team is calibrated and the visiting team isn't. And the standardization of the game would be different. When I first wrote about that, it was just an idea to get people to think and realize just how standardized the playing surface is in our game. And it doesn't have to be. But how that effect of standardization has created tactics that are sort of uniform gym to gym, and we don't have to do that. Again, it might be the right thing to do, and that brings me to a third option, which is to do nothing. And it brings me back to this last graphic that I love, one of my favorite graphics I made at Grantland. This shows the assist rate per made field goal a few years ago now, and it really, I didn't know what was going to show up when I plotted it. Like, I kind of had a general idea, but the fact that I saw that 96% of corner threes are assisted and only 37 to 38% of some of the mid-range shots are assisted really enlightened me in a way. It gave me sort of this idea, and that is the following. 84% of threes are assisted, so any league that's obsessed with shooting more threes is also a league obsessed with making more threes happen, creating more threes. And those plays are pretty beautiful basketball. So one argument the do-nothing camp has is like, do you dislike the way the game looks right now? Do you dislike what's happening in the 2013 Heat, 2014 Spurs, 2015 Warriors? Is that ugly to you? It isn't to me. And I think that is a solid argument, that theoretically the three-point line, while it subsidizes points, it also encourages ball movement and assist. And I think that's interesting. So, like I said, I wanted to leave 5 minutes for questions. I did that. Thank you for coming. And if you want to spend time with us outside going through these, we have a bunch of these 3D models. We're going to be looking at them out there after the talk, but I wanted to take some questions. Thanks, Kyle Gerby. Anybody have questions? I can't really see out there. There's a question here. We got to get a mic. Okay.
So I guess people view Kobe Bryant, what's your last one? People view Kobe Bryant as someone who created his own shot, didn't get many assists. And I guess, do you think we'll ever see someone like that ever again, shooting that many mid-range jumpers, or is Steph Curry the new Kobe Bryant in that he's getting a lot of assisted threes, but he can also make his own unassisted threes?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. But one of the provocative things I've been saying about this topic is if, like, Michael Jordan entered the league today, he would be shooting a lot more threes. And is that what we really worshipped about Michael Jordan? Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing. And it's a more of a conversation as a collective we need to have is what do we value in basketball in terms of aesthetics, athletics, intelligence, tactics, and how are we legislating a playing surface that gives us that? And I do think there is a perfect balance for different people. It's different thresholds between 3-point, 2-point shooting, mid-range shooting. Far be it from me to say what's yours or mine, but one thing that I think is clear is that little ribbon on the perimeter of the court is the biggest economic sort of factor in how the behavior of individual players, whether they're Kobe or Steph or DeAndre Jordan, behave. And the value of these guys over the last few years, it affects everything. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it's not up to me to make those kinds of claims. But I do think, that's a conversation we should start having as, college hoops is 33% threes. Is that what we want in the NBA? Because if that's what we want, we're going to have it in 5 years. And if it's not, then what are we going to do about that? But I appreciate your question. Anybody else? Yeah.
So when there was a spike in three-point attempts when the lines moved in, did the shot chart actually change to gravitate towards the outside, or did it remain the same, but it just so happened that three-point shooting?
So many things happen, and it's actually fascinating. And if I was still writing, I would have somebody write. I would want to go do that. I was talking to some undergrads yesterday, and those numbers about efficiency and frequency are biased. There's a lot of selection bias. If, for instance, Jared Sullinger and Kevin Love stop shooting threes at a 25-foot line, so that efficiency is marked by that. So there's a lot of balls in the air, like different kinds of players will still be out there. Some players will throw in the towel. But what we saw is more in the paint, less behind the arc, obviously. But yeah, we can look at that empirically now. And we couldn't do that the last time we were messing with the line, Yeah.
I read something recently about how, given that there's this huge explosion in the three-point line, it's being utilized, the mid-range two-pointer is opened up, this defense is being tailored to the three-point line.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, so, if you look at shot charts for the Warriors, Rockets, and Spurs, the Warriors and Rockets have a lot of threes. The Spurs actually have more of a mid-range game skill teams. Obviously, the Spurs are a fantastic team. What do you think about that?
I've never thought about that. Yeah. So, unfortunately, ask Tom Haberstroh. He knows. My time is up, right, Kyle? Like, it's a 24-second shot clock here. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming in. I really appreciate it.